Okay, great. We'll start in a few seconds.
Ah, that in a few seconds. Okay.
And can we make sure that everybody is who is not speaking at the moment is muted? People will have a chance to ask questions and answers later on. But for now, just so there are no inadvertent disturbances.
Just send me the link because those have ended.
Yes. Okay. We'll start now. Hello and welcome to another webinar from the International Manifesto Group and our co-hosts, Friends of Socialist China. Our subject today is the Middle East in the Trump era. How much has really changed? I'm Radhika Desai. I'm convener of the International Manifesto Group, a member of the Friends of Socialist China Committee, and moderator of this event. As usual, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button, which will get its vital message out. Please check out our website, both Friends of Socialist China and the International Manifesto Group, and consider sharing, donating, volunteering, etc. For a brief moment, many took President Trump at his word and believed that he would be a new peacemaker. Hopes rose especially after he unexpectedly engineered the first Gaza ceasefire. Was it the first installment in a larger peace agenda? Given the economic policy disasters the Trump administration has piling on top of one another in recent months, stretching back even before his inauguration, one might be forgiven for forgetting that he did this. Now, of course, any remaining hope that that ceasefire had engendered has been sadly dashed as the horrible televised massacres continue with the Trump administration's full backing, while the US tests its military might against the tiny but remarkably successful Houthis and gears up for the mother of all invasions, with Iran in its crosshairs. Of course, no ceasefire for which the staunch Zionist Trump took credit could last. Yet today, worse atrocities are daily inflicted on the brave Gazans who have returned or remained to fight for their international legal, historic, and ancestral rights, while the Western world not only stays silent, but strives to deport and silence those who protest. The use of starvation as an instrument of war has reached new heights. Medical convoys are being attacked. Israel's incursion into Syria has widened. Repression and state settler violence against native Palestinians is rising in the West Bank. And against this background, Trump has indulged in the obscenity of talking about turning Gaza into a Riviera of the Middle East, essentially endorsing Israel's vision of a Gaza free of Palestinians. This, even the otherwise US and Israel friendly governments in the region have had to distance themselves from. While Palestinian student Mohammad Khalil is to be deported from the US, while protesters at Columbia and other universities, many of them from the third world, are to be silenced, arrested, and expelled at Trump's behest for the crime of saying no to genocide. Essentially, the so-called principles of freedom of speech, etc., are, of course, being gravely endangered. This is, of course, what the West trumpets about itself. So how do we assess these complex developments? Are we seeing continuity or change vis-a-vis previous US policies, including that of the arch Zionist Biden? How are other international actors placed in this scenario? Will there be a war on Iran? Will there be a ceasefire in Gaza? What are the key developments in the region and where are they leading? With us to share their deep knowledge and understanding of developments are two of the most powerful voices that we can hear today on this topic, and we are very, very privileged to have them with us. Professor Mohammad Marandi is Professor of North American Studies and teaches in the Faculty of World Studies at the University of Tehran. Ramzy Baroud is an author, journalist, and editor of the all-important Palestine Chronicle. They need very little introduction, and I'm not going to spend very much time. They are ubiquitous in the mainstream and alternative media as among a small handful of authorities on the situation. So without further ado, let me first ask Ramzy Baroud to start us off with his understanding of the regional and world situation as it can be seen from the eye of the current storm, or one of the eyes of the current storm, namely Gaza. And he will be followed by Professor Marandi doing the same from the equally important other equally important eye of the Western storm of Middle Eastern policy, namely Iran. So Ramzy, please take it away. The floor is yours.
I thank you very much for this lovely introduction, for joining you once again, and for the fantastic efforts that you are all making on behalf of justice and in solidarity, not only with the Palestinian people and other oppressed nations in the Middle East, but also with all oppressed people all over the world. This is essentially one fight that cannot be divided between Gaza and Iran and Yemen and Mali. It's essentially the same fight for against injustice, and if we prevail, all of us will prevail at the same time. Um, it is rare that we speak with confidence about this issue. I mean, this is the first time, I would say, in the history of the Palestinian intellectual movement in which we are not perceived to be at the receiving end of Zionist brutality and cruelty and US-led imperialist savagery, but rather we are in a position where we can actually finally say what we have always been saying, that we are people with agency. We are people who are able to influence and, inshallah, hopefully very soon, even determine political outcomes within Palestine and outside Palestine. And who would have guessed that this tiny little Gaza Strip? I mean, I was born and raised in Gaza, in a refugee camp called Nusayrat, which is now associated with numerous, quite often daily massacres, but also with the tenacity and stubbornness of the Palestinian refugees, who are the descendants of the Fallahim, the refugees of Palestine 1948, resulting from the catastrophic destruction of the Palestinian homeland that we call al-Nakba. Who would have ever thought, and definitely I would have not, as a young, idealist socialist growing up in Gaza, would have thought that Gaza could indeed become at the epicenter of the world's geopolitical changes. And you can't blame us, and you can't blame yourself, because it goes against all anti-colonial theories. We have no natural resources. Yeah, they talk about that we have some gas at the Mediterranean. And, sometimes we get excited about certain ideas, and you have some magazine publish the wealth of gas at the Gaza coast, but it really is not about gas. It's not even about territorial expansion. How big is Gaza? 181 square miles if you live in North America, and 365 square kilometers if you live in the rest of the world. It's a very, very small piece of land that there is really very little room for people to even expand naturally within Gaza. And now they are all more or less being crammed into about 30% of the total size of that extremely small piece of land. So even the theory of colonial expansion, territorial expansion, doesn't even apply here. So what is going on exactly? Let me just start from the question that is being asked, and if you could kindly help me keep track of time, because sometimes I just wander off and I don't know how to find my way back. So let's just start with the initial question: will anything change now that Trump administration is in power? And I would say, honestly, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter simply because the outcomes, the changes, the events that are shaping the Middle East are created by the people of the Middle East themselves. Gazans first, but you can't discount the Lebanese, you can't discount the Yemenis, you can't discount the Iranians. They are all part of this, and hopefully this this circle of solidarity, this circle of self-assertion and collective agency is going to keep on growing. but the initiative was taken by these forces, not the other way around. And that's very, very important. It's important because it helps us understand that there are so many myths here that would have to be demolished or have to be challenged in order for us to determine what are the possible outcomes and what are the possible scenarios. Let's look just number one at the myth of the Israeli civilization or the Zionist Western civilization versus Arab, Palestinian, Asian, Muslim barbarity or barbarism, as it was coined by Theodor Herzl, the founder of modern Zionism. The Israelis or the Zionists have always positioned themselves as kind of an extension of Western civilization into the Middle East. And in the process of doing so, they have managed to, well, make the desert bloom. That's one of them. But also this beacon of civilization as rampant, described as part of a rampart of Europe, against Europe against Asia, described by Herzl as the outpost of barbarism in the world. And now, I don't know if we actually need an argument to actually argue that the opposite has proven to be true. And I don't know if there is any human being with true conscience and a sense of reason would look at what Israel has done in Gaza and the way that the degree of dignity and resistance and resolve and humanity and spirituality and faith that Palestinians have responded to this barbarity would actually argue that Zionism stands for as a beacon of civilization as opposed to the Asian barbarism of the Palestinians. I think that myth has been shattered. Anyone who was paying attention, of course, would have realized that this myth should have been shattered a long time ago, but a lot of people were not paying attention, and now that they do, now that they have, I think the conversation regarding this issue of what is the representation of the Zionist versus the Palestinian as a representative of Asia, I think this myth has been shattered. Then the myth of Fortress Israel, this idea that Israel is this powerful platform of technological military know-how, impenetrable by any definitions. And this so-called villa in the jungle, as was called by Ehud Barak, a former Israeli prime minister, and sadly repeated by the former head of the European, I think the European Commission, describing Europe as a villa in the jungle, as opposed, against the expansionism of Russia and so forth. This idea, this Western racist notion that no matter what they do, somehow they are racially, culturally, civilizationally superior. And it's us, the barbaric Arab and Muslim and Palestinian and Russian and Chinese, and it's kind of trying to climb the wall of this villa, of this fortress, and trying to kind of ruin this romantic dream that the West has built for itself. And part of this is not only racist, because that's kind of quite obvious, but also the idea that we are incapable of fighting back. We are incapable of devising the means that would allow us to overcome this superior technological advancement, which has been promoted by the like of Jabotinsky in the Iron Wall that they wanted to build around Israel. And by the Iron Wall, he wasn't actually talking about a real wall, but about the idea of pushing the Palestinian Arab population out and building some sort of layers of defense around Israel and Zionism that would make it impossible for the Palestinians or anyone else to break through. That idea was promoted and sustained and financed by the Americans for decades. For example, during the Bill Clinton era, They spoke about the need to allow Israel to maintain its military edge over the Arabs. That was, in my mind, I see that as Clinton's doctrine regarding Palestine and Israel, the military edge doctrine, although he is kind of famous for the containment doctrine. But really, this idea that we need to keep feeding Israel with the kind of military power, prowess, and technology that would make it even impossible for Arabs or Israel's enemies of any kind to even think that Israel can be militarily defeated. Well, it turned out it could. You're talking about a group of people who are part of a larger collective resistance that's been shaping up and taking place in Gaza for a long time, that actually managed to inflict greater damage to the Israeli military over the course of 15, 16, 17 months that entire traditional standing Arab armies combined. So that myth is shattered, and I think it's going to be shattered for a very long time. Also, the idea of small and besieged Israel. This whole notion that the Zionists have been promoting, that, poor Israel is just kind of found itself stuck in this hostile territory, and we are just fighting for survival. Enemies are, coming from all over. Well, guess what? Number one, it's not true. If you look at the behavior of countries like Egypt and various other traditional Arab neighbors of Palestine, if they are not outright pro-Israel, they are certainly not pro-Palestine. And we have seen that while Ansarullah in Yemen, by the way, they don't appreciate the term Houthis themselves. So Ansarullah in Yemen have managed to create some kind of accountability by blocking, ships that are bound to for Israel from reaching the Israeli southern coast. Arabs actually conspired with the United States to ensure that Israel is being fed, that the Israeli lifestyle, they were not going to be starving by any account, like the Palestinians have been starving for the last 17, 18 months, but to ensure that their lifestyle does not change in any way. Right, so they kind of opened this trade route that goes from United Arab Emirates, so Saudi Arabia, to Jordan, all the way to Israel, to make sure that Israel is okay, while their own brethren in Gaza are starving to death. So no, Israel is not an isolated little entity. Is the exact opposite here to be true. And if indeed Israel is this democratic nation that is just opting for peace and security, why this constant, relentless Israeli pressure on Israel, on the United States, to go to war against Iran? Why? Why open up that front if you indeed are opting for peace? I mean, we have all seen what happened with the US invaded Iraq in 2003. And Iraq at that time was a country that was browbeaten by sanctions. It was in a state, and I've been to Iraq just before the war, and I've seen with my own eyes the entire country was dilapidated. Not a single car in Baghdad actually did not have a broken windows or glass, because they could not even import the most basic elements to repair their cars, their hospitals, their schools, and so forth and so on. Yet years of Iraqi resistance eventually pushed the Americans out. Obama takes his army, moves elsewhere, looking for a fight against China and the East and South China Sea, what they called at the time the pivot to Asia. But knowing what Iraq, the destabilization that Iraq has created in the Middle East, and the creation of ISIS and other terrorist groups in that region, and we know where the funding and the support of some of these groups come from. If that was Iraq alone, imagine going against powerful Iran. Iran that is not isolated, Iran with strong, powerful allies. They are not the arms of Iran, as some mainstream and even Arab media describe them. They are not the arms of anybody. They are entities with political agency, and they are able to create their own independent strategies. But imagine the destabilization of the Middle East that would happen as a result, to the point that Tucker Carlson, the famous conservative commentator, a few days ago tweeted on X said that anyone who wants to go to war against Iran or wants the US to go to war against Iran is an enemy of the United States. And of course, he was talking about Israel. So this idea that Israel is a small country that won't be left alone to live in peace and security is complete garbage. And the reason that it is total rubbish is the fact that Israel is a settler colonial regime. By definition, you can't change who you are. You can't change your nature. If you are a settler colonial regime, it means that you have to be in a constant state of expansion or your function in the world ceases to carry meaning. So there's some strife in Syria. There is a conflict in Syria. You find some open piece of land, whether a few meters or 25 or 100 kilometers inside Syria, you go there and you take over that territory. Any destabilization, and this is a warning to Arab regimes really who think that they are safe. I promise you, any destabilization in Jordan, in Egypt, in Saudi Arabia, you are going to find Israeli Merkava tanks going there and taking over territories and creating yet more buffer zones. So Israel is not a peaceful, small, vulnerable little state trying to survive. Israel is the heart of all of these crises, and Israel is a settler colonial regime that is bent on constant and total expansion. That takes us to the myth of European democracy.
5 minutes. You have 5 more minutes.
Absolutely. The myth of European democracy. I mean, honestly, we almost bought into this. We know we have been very critical of European colonialism. We know the history of European neocolonialism and interventionism and all of that. But, I think many of us got fooled by this idea that salvation could eventually come from Europe, could eventually come from the West. You see, if we are able to influence their mainstream media using the right language, if we write enough letters to the editors, everything is going to be okay. And we all bought into this. Well, what happened in Gaza, or what is happening in Gaza today, is indications that Europe is very corrupt, morally, to the absolute core, that under no circumstance could have possibly been a friend or could have possibly stood against this kind of Israeli barbarity in the Gaza Strip. Before, we thought maybe the Europeans did not really know the extent of what happened during the Nakba. The same way we quite often use excuses to, explain the genocides of Rwanda or Namibia or the Holocaust and all of that. The idea that maybe the world did not know to the extent of all these criminalities and the extent of all these crimes. But who doesn't know now? Who doesn't know? And yet, despite of everything they know, they continue to channel these very weapons that are carrying out the very genocide against the population of Gaza. Europe is not outsider to this. Europe is not a mere complicit. This is indeed a Western genocide that is led by Israel, but financed, supported, sustained, and defended by the Western conglomerate. And the proof of that is the fact that the mere expression of thought, whether on Facebook or any social media platform or in public, could actually get you arrested in the United States. When we travel, when we leave the US, we quite often leave our phones and get new phones in order for us to go across the borders, because we are scared that anything that we could be having on our person and our digital media devices could be used against us in the court of law, as if we, by the sheer criticism of the Western role in sustaining this genocide, could actually put us in the category of terrorism or any other legal excuse that could actually get us in trouble. This is European, Western, American democracy. So if anybody is still counting on a change that would happen through this corrupt, moral, legal, political entity, give up on that and invest in a different type of struggle that happens through civil society within your own country, society, community, in order for you to bring about change and to allow you to actually be part of an actual movement for change that is happening globally. One last thing, and I know I must have exceeded my time. I also want to talk about
Not at all.
the
You have a
myth of
couple more
this.
minutes. Yeah.
Lovely. I want to talk about the myth of disunity, that that we are inherently disunited. Palestinians are disunited, Arabs are disunited, Muslims are disunited. I don't think it is so simple, and I think it is this perpetuates the notion that the colonized man and woman is in a constant state of disarray, is unable to conjure up thoughts, to formulate any kind of meaningful action to fight colonialism. It is not true. I think everybody within the Middle East right now is entrenched behind his, her, or their own collective self-interest. There are those who are resisting and those who are not, those who are fighting back and those who are standing with the enemy. But ultimately, there is a class struggle that is going on in the Middle East right now, and everybody is looking after his own interests. Gaza is leading the struggle with a large group and growing allies that are happening from Iran to Lebanon to Yemen to elsewhere in the region. And I think that is the front that is causing this much more than a headache, but rather destabilizing the U.S. Western imperialism in our region. And this is really where the struggle is at right now. Netanyahu, this is not about Netanyahu does not want to relent because he's afraid that his government does not have a chance of surviving if he lets go of the war. I think there's more to it than that. If Israel is defeated in Gaza, and by defeated I mean is unable to achieve its colonial objectives in Gaza, and by extension, the allies of Gaza in the Middle East claim any kind of victory, it is the day that it will be recognized that Zionism has failed not only as an ideology, but also as a function, as a settler colonial ideological function. And the moment that happens, I think we could indeed be talking about what Ilan Pape refers to as the last chapter for Zionism and for Israel as well.
Wow, thank you so much, Ramzy Baroud, for that amazing, I would say, powerful endorsement of the agency of the people of Gaza, of the people of the region, usually called the Middle East, but in fact, West Asia, and of course, North Africa. And I would also say, for reminding us that if we are looking for continuities as opposed to change, perhaps we should not be looking at the succession of equally imperialist Zionist governments that have taken power in Washington, but look at for the continuities and the changes among the people of the region, among the people who are fighting imperialism in the region. So thank you so much. And from here, we will now go to Professor Mohammad Marandi, who will, I'm sure, add to your amazing discussion in an excellent fashion. So Professor Marandi, please go ahead.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I think Ramzy's speech was very comprehensive, and there really isn't much more to say. What I would like to begin with is what I believe to be the key point in today's world, and that is that the Israeli regime has been soundly defeated. We are at a point where, for the first time, the regime, as Ramzy alluded to, has been exposed to the world. In the past, Western media, Western elites, often out of ignorance, but usually out of racism and support for Zionism, ignored the reality on the ground. And we would regularly have discussions and debates about ethno-supremacism, racism, ethnic cleansing, and they were often like Teflon. They could just walk away without any change in their tone or mentality nor would they feel the slightest amount of guilt, yet they would continue to see themselves as superior, as the societies and culture that is civilized compared to the non-Western world, which would be the uncivilized world. What the people of Gaza have done over a year and a half now is that they've exposed the West. And the West is much more important than the Israeli regime. The Israeli regime, as we've seen, without full Western support, without support from the United States, Canada, the EU, Britain, Australia, New Zealand, it would not survive. If they withdrew their support today, it would not survive for more than a few weeks. The regime day and night bombs people with weapons, ammunition from weapons that are all gifts from either the United States or the Germans or the British or someone else. And the assistance that they receive is endless. But the fact today is that the West is in a very difficult position. The West has now been confronted with the reality of a rising global South, or as some would call it, the global majority. We see the rise of China, we see the rise of BRICS nations, we see the rise or revival of Russian influence, and we see the rise of the axis of resistance in West Asia. All of this has made the United States in a much more vulnerable position. It's put the United States in a very vulnerable position. Trump today, as we've seen, on the one hand, he's waging war against Iran, the axis of resistance, Russia, and China, but also the rest of the world. Of course, the policy is foolish, but I think it is reflective of the fact that when empires decline, they become more violent, more angry, more irrational, more emotional, and more dangerous. But in any case, this decline is taking place before our eyes. A few years ago, when we spoke about the decline of the West, we would often be ridiculed by some of our own colleagues, some of our own friends. But now I think it's becoming clear for everyone, including for many in the West itself, that the world is changing very rapidly. The United States itself has acted as a catalyst for this change, ironically, through these policies of aggression and abuse and arrogance. They've pushed countries like Russia and China and Iran, among others, closer towards each other. They've pushed countries together to bring about BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and other international bodies that are regional and which exclude the West. So on the one hand, we live in an era or a time when the West is rapidly declining, the imperial West, whose empire has really lasted for hundreds of years. The decline is very rapid. And at the same time, its brutality is exposed in a way in which we've never seen before. We've seen brutality, or we've read of brutality in the past, in history books, perhaps in newspapers, perhaps brief clips from Vietnam. But what we're seeing today in Gaza is unprecedented. And in a way, it becomes perhaps the worst and most evil crime in the last few centuries, in the sense that it is being carried out in front of the eyes of the world. We've had similar crimes carried out by Western empires in Africa, in Latin America, in the Americas, in Southern Asia and elsewhere, in Southeast Asia and East Asia. But never before has it been carried out in front of the eyes of the world. The West is on the decline, but at the same time it has been exposed. Western media outlets, which in the past pretended to be the face of reason and humanity and democracy and civilization, outlets like the BBC or CNN, which pretended to care for the ordinary man and woman on the streets and across the world have now been exposed to be tools of empire, which shamelessly try to justify what the Zionist regime is doing every single day, either through distortion, either through disinformation, or through simply ignoring the news. In fact, nowadays we rarely see anything about Palestine in the Western media, despite the fact that some of the most brutal massacres happened over the past week. People being burnt alive, mass murder. You would imagine that in a civilized society, this would be the top news. But we see in reality, it is ignored as much as possible because it rocks the boat. So the West has been exposed as much weaker than it has been before. It has been exposed in being inhumane, and it has been exposed as being the true force behind ethno-supremacism and ethnic cleansing at a time when the West, until very recently, was promoting woke culture in their own societies. Wokeness was fashionable in the United States, yet genocide in Palestine was justifiable as well. These inconsistencies and contradictions have all further exposed the West, and that is what makes me optimistic, especially since in the West itself, we see the youth have woken up. We see young Jews waking up and leading resistance against Zionism. We see Jewish activists at the forefront of resistance to the Israeli regime's onslaught against freedom in the United States, in Europe, and in the UK. And of course, Muslims, Christians, Hindus, and people from all walks of life and backgrounds, they're joining the resistance. I've mentioned this a couple of times elsewhere. I recall early on in the genocide, during the genocide, there was a picture of a young woman in front of the Israeli embassy, the Israeli regime embassy in Seoul, South Korea. And every day she would stand there in protest. Today, these heroes have millions upon millions of people who've joined them. This has indeed become a global movement, a movement that includes the youth in North America and Europe, as well as the people in Africa, Asia, Southeast Asia, East Asia, and Latin America. And that is why I believe that the Israeli regime has destroyed itself. The Israeli regime every day slaughters more people, but every day when it does so, it diminishes itself further. The youth in the West, as we've seen, especially in the poll that came out with regards to the United States, they've turned against the regime. And the youth in the West, every single day when they see new crimes, that animosity becomes further entrenched. The axis of resistance will continue to push back. The animosity towards Iran is because of Iran's support for the Palestinian people, because Iran for over 4 decades has had a principled position on decolonization and on its opposition to ethnic cleansing, mass murder, and the displacement of the Palestinian people. Yet the resistance is not just Iran. It is not just Ansarullah and the Yemeni people and the Yemeni armed forces. It is not just Hezbollah. The resistance today is a global resistance, and people from across the world are a part of this resistance. The Palestinian people are not alone. The people of Gaza are not alone. Every day they endure new misery. Every day we read texts from Palestinians or clips from Palestinians in Gaza that prevent us from sleeping at night. But each one of these messages, each one of these deaths, each one of these maimed people, maimed Palestinians, they're sending a message to the world. And that is waking people up further. That is in strengthening the resistance. So ironically, while the Israeli regime and overwhelmingly Zionists across the world and in Palestine itself support genocide, while they overwhelmingly support it, people across the world are turning against them, and they are becoming increasingly despised. And that makes me optimistic about the future. We have to push harder. We have to be optimistic. A great deal has been achieved. Many people have sacrificed their lives, not just in Palestine itself. In Lebanon, parents and wives have sent their youth and their husbands to the fronts to fight against Israel to ease pressure on Gaza. Thousands were martyred in Lebanon. In Yemen today, we see Ansarullah bravely pushing hard and punishing the Israeli regime, and in response, the Americans are bombing civilians, civilian infrastructure, and murdering innocents amidst Western media silence. When we see the sort of sacrifices that have been made among the people of Lebanon and Hezbollah and Ansarullah in Yemen, that makes us more responsible. That makes our burden heavier. And so we must push harder. We must be more active online. We must be more active on the streets. We must push for boycotts, not just a boycott of the Israeli regime, a boycott of the United States. Even in the West today, they're boycotting the United States for other reasons that are not linked to Palestine. But we should push this and isolate the United States, which is the main enabler of the Zionist regime. We should try to create boycotts across the world, whether it's shops, whether it's products, whether it's traveling to the United States, whether it's going to American universities. We should dissuade people from having anything to do with the United States until the situation changes completely. Nevertheless, I think that that is the direction in which things are moving. Things may seem dark at times and sometimes very dark, but there is no doubt that there is light at the end of the tunnel. And the greatest defeat of the Israeli regime, as I've said, is the fact that it has lost its legitimacy in the eyes of the global community. And that is never going to be changed. They're never going to be able to turn back the clock. The regime is illegitimate, and people see it as illegitimate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Marandi. I think that was really great. I hope you can stay around for at least a little while for some questions and answers. So now we've had some excellent analyses, and it's time to move to questions and answers. So if you would like to ask a question, please use the raise hand function, which you should find under, let me see, yes, I'm probably under the reaction functions. Yes, react function. So please use that. Meanwhile, while we are waiting for people to raise questions, let me very quickly make a brief announcement about our next event. The next event is on Sunday, the 27th of April. It is entitled "The Bandung Spirit Lives On: Unity Against Imperialism and for the struggle for a multipolar world." And it focuses on the Bandung Conference, which took place 70 years ago among 29 Asian and African countries. And in many ways, what we are today calling multipolarity is in keeping with the goals of that movement of third world solidarity. Our speakers include Ben Norton, Jenny Clegg, Mushahid Hussain, Isaac Saini. So please do spread the word and attend. Okay, let me go to the questions. I see there are 3 questions already, and I also have some questions. So I will take all the 3 questions, reserve my questions for the next round. Carlos, Alan, and Jenny, in that order, please go ahead.
Thanks very much, Radhika, and thanks so much to Ramzy and to Professor Marandi for wonderful, wonderful contributions, really thought-provoking and very powerful. It struck me that when Ramzy made this point about the exploding the myth of Zionist civilization versus Arab civilization, that we can really expand that to the myth of the West versus the rest, the idea that the US and its allies have a sort of monopoly on these ideas of civilization and democracy, the whole democratic versus authoritarian dichotomy, which is kind of taken the place in the mainstream historical narrative of good old-fashioned white supremacist ideas that were popular in the 19th century and the first half of the 20th century. If you draw a map of the countries that support Israel's genocidal project and those that don't, what you essentially have is a map of the global north versus the global south, or the global minority versus the global majority, or the first world versus the third world, or the West versus the East. People see there's a genocide going on. They see that it's being armed, that it's being financed, that it's being given diplomatic cover by the supposed defenders of democratic liberal values. But is there anything less democratic than apartheid? And is there anything less liberal than genocide, right? So this whole thing is contributing to breaking down cultural hegemony, not just in Israel, not just in the US, but throughout the West, throughout the imperialist world. And it means that the ruling classes are losing their ability to manufacture consent for their wars, for their unilateral sanctions, for their economic coercion, for their destabilization campaigns, for their coups, for their proxy wars, and so on. And it means that not only are people in the West questioning their governments over Palestine, but also increasingly also in relation to Iran, in relation to Russia, in relation to China, in relation to Cuba, Venezuela, and further afield. I mean, the starkest example is that we've been told for years that China's carrying out a genocide against Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang. Meanwhile, people can see with their own eyes, just looking at social media and whatnot, that there is a genocide going on in Gaza, but the media and our politicians are telling us that there isn't one going on. So, in that sense, we talk about, Ramzy talked about the last chapter for Zionism and Israel, but I think all of this is actually feeding into a last chapter for a 500-year-old imperialist system of hegemony, domination, war, and exploitation. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Carlos, and I hope that Ramzy and Professor Marandi will comment on that. Alan, please go ahead.
So thank you to both speakers. I've long wanted to have a conversation of this character, and it's a great honor and privilege to do so. I'm going to touch on a complicated and controversial question. We have just returned from Russia, where we were in Moscow and in St. Petersburg, and met with many sectors, as we always do, of Russian public opinion, of people in Russia. And I would say that the support for Palestine amongst the people of Russia is across the board. I mean, there is a fascist wing of Russian society. There are fascist organizations. They are now thankfully much reduced in number. And there are elements of pro-Zionism because Russia has a long relation with Israel. There are many Jewish people who have emigrated to Israel from Russia, so it's a very touchy subject. But there is a deep felt feeling amongst Russian people that there is an identity of interest between their struggle and the struggle of the Gazan people. And this is based on something very simple. They themselves have been victim of the murder of 20 million people at the hands of the fascists. And that's remembered by families. But second, because of what was happening in Ukraine. And I think that one of the big problems we have is that in European and Western opinion, the identity between what is happening to the Palestinians and what was being done to the Russian-speaking population of Ukraine is not understood. Now, I've been in Yalta. I've met with people who were the victims of the Odessa massacre. And there was no doubt in the minds of those of us who met them that when Zelensky speaks of taking Crimea back, he doesn't mean the people of Crimea. In other words, we're talking about the elimination of several million people that Ukrainian society and Ukrainian leadership and Ukrainian fascism feels do not belong on their country, which is why the Russian language, which is the mother tongue of 43% of Ukrainians, is banned by the Rada, completely, Rada being the parliament, completely and utterly. So in terms of what kind of unity is required, I think that Russia is held back essentially by diplomatic issues, and I hope these will be overcome. We know they've been supplying armaments to Iran. and so on. But in terms of identity, it seems to me it's time for the solidarity front that supports the resistance to recognize the legitimacy of the struggle of the Russian people against imperialism and what imperialism is trying to do to it.
Thanks, Alan. And let me say, I've been a bad chair so far. I've been allowed the people who are asking questions to go on for far too long. So I would please request, I know this is an extremely powerful set of themes and we are all we all feel very strongly about it. But in the interest of proper dialogue, please try and keep it as succinct as possible. So Jenny, you're next.
Thanks, Radhika, and thanks to both of the speakers for their very powerful presentations. Ramzy talked about growing unity, and I wonder about this, what kind of a role the Saudi Iran rapprochement have played in building that, and also in the Beijing Declaration that brought together the 14 Palestinian organizations. And I really want to ask a question, which I think that other people, I see that Raphael is coming up after me and Carlos as well, in terms of what we're aiming for. And I was wondering, what should we make of the Arab peace proposals? Are they just a regurgitation of the Oslo Agreement, or in this changing context with growing unity, do they mean something more? And the question that I want to ask Marandi is about the reasons why Iran and Russia didn't back Assad in the end and let him fall in Syria. And in a previous IMG webinar, somebody talked about a conscious decision. And what was it? Just that they were fed up that Assad had come to some agreement with the Gulf states, or was it some way of kind of creating a little bit more room for unity?
Great, thank you, Jenny. These are already quite big questions. So Raphael, you and I will go in the next round. For now, I would like to hand it back to Ramzy and then Professor Marandi for some responses to the questions that they wish to respond to.
Should I start or Marandi start?
Go ahead, Ramzy.
Okay. So there were some really very important points raised by Carlos, Alan, and Jenny, and it's going to take a while to unpack. So I kind of really want to just basically touch on something that kind of by way of addressing or answering some of these points. The points by Carlos, the consent, this idea that we are, right is wrong and wrong is right, and this illusion created for us by Western media, where we need to cry over a genocide in which we don't really have much evidence to. I'm not trying to undermine, and please, I don't want to be misunderstood here. I'm not trying to undermine the struggles of any group, any ethnicity, any minority, anywhere in the world, not even in China. But I'm just saying that if you kind of see the kind of discursive warfare that is being carried out in the United States against China over the mistreatment of the Uyghur, compared to the complete and utter denial that there is even a hint of genocide in Gaza, while we see the mutilated bodies in Gaza's only Christian hospital, the Baptist hospital, piles of people on top of each other, doctors over patients, over refugees, and we look at it and we say, no, there's no genocide. Absolutely not. We don't know what you're even talking about. And if you say that it is, then you are an anti-Semitic, and we are supposed to accept that. It's okay. That is very rational kind of stream of thought. So there is something very strange going on here, but I feel like, and I want to believe that we are at the end of that kind of that kind of illusion, that's kind of showmanship of pretending that what is happening in Gaza and in Palestine is just the painful process. What was it? Condoleezza Rice. Remember Condoleezza Rice when she went to Lebanon in 2006 and she was commenting on the butchery of thousands of innocent Lebanese, and she said, well, these are the birth pangs of the new Middle East. I mean, it just, I don't even know what kind of commentary one can apply to this kind of thinking. But now we see it like we have never seen it before. So I don't think there is any amount of cultural hegemony or manufactured consent or all of these, kind of academically sounding terms that can possibly hide the fact that the West has been exposed for what it is. Beneath this veneer of civilization, there is an extremely ugly monster that seems to feed on the lives of innocent civilians, not just in the Middle East, but beyond the Middle East. And they don't even have the intellectual integrity to take an iota of responsibility that would give us a little bit of an overlap, that could say that, okay, we have a starting point of agreement. There is absolutely nothing that would help us come to terms with the West in its current form, however the West wishes to define itself. Speaking of manufacturing consent, I think it's also important to give massive credits to the people of Gaza, not only because of their steadfastness, because steadfastness or sumud is in our blood. We have no other way of being in a state of hardship unless we practice our culture of sumud that goes back numerous generations. But there is something extraordinary that happened here, folks. And I really would love if you would just entertain me and pay close attention to this. Mainstream media has always, or we have always been told that the salvation of Palestine is the truth. As Malcolm X used to say, just tell them the truth and that's going to resolve everything. But here's the problem. The truth could only be communicated through mainstream media, and we have been completely marginalized from that cycle. Israel has decided to block mainstream media or any media from entering Gaza. So who has been reporting on the genocide in Gaza? Gazans. What universities did these Gazans go to? Islamic University, Azhar University, Khan Yunis University. Many of them are kids, social media influencers, don't even have degrees. None of them went to Western universities. None of them worked for the New York Times or the Guardians or the BBC or any of these organizations. Yet the degree of clarity regarding what is happening in Gaza today, despite the fact that nearly 250 Palestinian journalists in Gaza have been butchered, and thousands of teachers and professors and intellectuals and poets and bloggers have been killed or wounded in the war. We have never been so clear about the truth of what is happening in this isolated, besieged Gaza as we are today. And we have done it all with no mainstream media. Thank you very much, New York Times. Please stay out. Thank you very much, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, everybody else. Please stay out. The truth is being told by the Palestinians themselves with very little formal training or jobs or careers or university degrees. So it is this manufactured consent that Carlos was speaking about is being vanquished and challenged by the locals, by the natives of Gaza themselves, who taught themselves how to use the camera, how to speak on TikTok and Instagram, and how to write and how to do all of these things. And the message has never been more resounding or more powerful. There was also a question about what is the way out of this genocide? We have a saying my grandmother used to always say, actually the first time I heard about this was when I had a thorn that went through in my knees when I was playing with my friends on the beach, and she said, I need to take the thorn out. I said, Grandma, it's gonna hurt. She said, the pain of 1 hour is better than the pain of every hour. And وجع ساعة ولا كل ساعة, she said. I didn't fully understand what that meant, but it meant just take the thorn out and you are going to be okay. And I think we in Palestine are going through that same the same thinking, the same paradigm of the pain of 1 hour is better than the. Imagine a scenario in which this genocide is going to be resolved at the expense of the Palestinian people. Imagine Palestinians being subdued as a result of this, and by extension, all of their supporters and all of the movements shaped around Palestine, from Lebanon, Yemen, Iran to Brazil and China. All of these new revolutionary spirits that have risen as a result of all of this. Imagine all of them receiving that blow. Imagine the sense of defeatism that is going to be created around our movement. We cannot allow this. So we in Palestine are going to go through the pain of that hour, the pain of this genocide, because we cannot even imagine a scenario in which we are going to lose this. We can't accept it. And you know exactly what will happen if we end up losing. It's going to be another Nakba. There's going to be another exodus. There will be another 1 million or 2 million Palestinians who are going to be pushed in various directions. And that's going to be the end of the Palestinian struggle for a long, long time. It's an extremely painful genocide. And I tell you the truth, I still don't know the fate of numerous members of my family. I know that about 55 of them were killed. And I say about because it's very, very difficult to get all the information and all the news. My sister was assassinated as one of the doctors killed in the Khan Yunis area. Her husband, a professor at the Azhar University, was also killed. Many other members of my family, cousins, their children, their wives, everybody is gone. And many more are still missing. But I tell you that for the sake of their blood, for the sake of their sacrifices, we cannot allow Israel to win under any circumstance. One last thing I want to say, that while indeed we have discovered these new opportunities of solidarities that we did not know existed, there are still many who haven't really risen up to meet the nature of the challenge underway. I don't think we have seen. There was a statement by the ambassador of China at The Hague last year during the International International Court of Justice's deliberations on the illegality of the Israeli occupation, and he said something absolutely astounding from kind of like international legal norms of these days, where he said Palestinians have the right to use armed struggle. This is part of any independent movement and any liberation movement anywhere. And that was a big deal when that kind of discourse is injected to mainstream thinking about Palestine and Israel. We need to see this kind of radical thinking. So we need to see everybody rising up to the occasion. This kind of dilly-dallying within the discourse. Well, Hamas is so bad, because don't forget, Hamas has done enough with this. Let's just stay focused. Let's remain focused, and let's remain unconditionally supportive and behind the Palestinian people in their march for freedom. I'm going to stop here. And although I know I did not touch on every point that has been raised.
Thank you so much. And please stay around, because there will be one more round of questions. But Professor Marandi, please go ahead.
Sure. These were very good questions. I'll try to be brief. I've been to Russia. I've been invited to Russia a few times since October the 7th, 2023. And I've also been to China a few times since this genocide began. In fact, I've just returned from Guangzhou and Chengdu. And it's very clear that the mood in both of these countries, from my anecdotal experiences and from what I've been hearing from intellectuals and academics and students in both countries, that the mood is very much against the Israeli regime, and that this has been brought about as a result of the genocide. The view of Palestine and apartheid in Palestine and Zionism before October the 7th, 2023 was very different. Most people were indifferent. Some simply thought this was a fight over a piece of land in a faraway place. And some actually had sympathy with the Israeli regime because of Western media and because of the sheer power Western media back then. But that has changed. And in fact, when I speak about young Jews in the United States, and of course, older Jews, I'm sure, standing against the Israeli regime, on my first trip to Russia after October the 7th, I met I won't name that person, but I met a very influential Jewish Russian. And I was very cautious. I knew him, we knew each other for years. I was very cautious about raising the issue, and he raised the issue. And this was a year and a half ago almost. It was just months after the genocide began. And he said, these people are crazy. He was speaking about the Israeli regime. So the mood, even among, at least from my experience, among Russians, and at least in the case of this gentleman, some Jews, has changed there as well. And although this is, I think, big, and I think this is very significant, but we have to push harder. This is not enough. We have to be more active. In fact, right now we are at one of the most sensitive times. The Israeli regime is carrying out a new offensive. They are pushing very hard to ethnically cleanse the Palestinian people in Gaza. Trump has said it repeatedly and recently again that he wants the Palestinian people removed. It is unbelievable that this can be said without universal condemnation, but it's the reality that we live in. So we have to push back very hard. It's our responsibility to the people of Gaza, who so heroically stood up for their rights and for their honor and for their dignity, despite the immense suffering that they experience every day, the terror that they experience 24 hours a day, the traumatized children that have to live with this horror day and night. That just simply increases our responsibility. And as I said, many have given their lives for the people of Palestine, whether in Lebanon or in Yemen, and that, I think, makes it more important for us to work harder, to push harder, and to always remain optimistic. Pessimism, we don't have time for pessimism. This is the great struggle of our era. I would say that the West is paying a huge price for what's happening. Some people may think that the West is not going to be hurt. I think that the West has already been badly damaged. The Zionist regime has always been a liability for the West, especially in recent decades. It's been a burden, and we're seeing that today. The collective West is seen as genocidal. The collective West is seen as responsible for the Holocaust of Gaza. The collective West is paying the price because the global majority has no respect for the West anymore. And in a way, the return of Trump is not necessarily a bad thing, because he is incapable of using or weaponizing soft power like Obama and some other Western leaders. The United States has been exposed. Trump is basically saying what the others would not say out loud. The others would allow the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people to happen, but what they would pretend to care for ordinary Palestinians. Trump is blunt about wanting the people of Palestine to go. So I think that every day that this genocide continues, the West is becoming more marginalized, more isolated than ever before, and this will have consequences in itself. The decline of the West, as I said earlier, has different aspects to it. There are different, in all the different realms, they're declining, whether it's economic, the military, as we've seen in Ukraine, but the moral decline of the West, or not the moral decline, but the the fact that the absence of morality among Western elites has been exposed, I think, is probably the biggest defeat of all. With regards to Syria, I think there are a number of things that we have to keep in mind. It's quite clear that the Syrian government during the last 3-4 years tilted towards Saudi Arabia and the Emirates in the hope that they would be willing or be able to resolve the problems of the Syrian government with the West. And I personally believe that they were naive, and I think we saw the results. As a result of that tilt, the role of the Iranians on the ground decreased, and the same was true with Hezbollah. But both Iran and Russia recognized that Syria was a dirty war. Iran was never in love with the Syrian government. For Iran, it did not matter if Assad was a Christian or an Alawite or Druze or Sunni or Jewish. What was important for Iran was that Syria was different from other Arab regimes, which are all dictatorships, or almost universally, almost all of them are dictatorships. But the difference was that Syria wanted its sovereignty and that Syria was supportive of the Palestinian cause. And Syria helped the resistance in the West Bank and in Lebanon and in Gaza. But near the end, they tilted away, and the Iranians and the Russians did try to help. But I think in the long run, actually, even though the misery of the people of Syria is really saddening, I over the last decade, I've traveled to Syria quite often. And I was in Syria actually returning from Lebanon when the war started. I was in Lebanon for a week after Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah was martyred. And I came back to Tehran through Syria. And so I was there shortly before it fell. And it was clear that people were just simply desperate. My Iranian friends in Syria were saying that they're not thinking about the war in Gaza, they're thinking about their own desperate situation. But the good thing, if you can say that, is that people across the world have recognized what has happened in Syria. Those of us who are a bit older, we remember how a decade ago the Western narrative on Syria was widely accepted. And those of us who are speaking about the CIA, Timber Sycamore, and ISIS and Al-Qaeda or Al-Qaeda being a tool of the West, our voices were drowned out. And Arab dictatorships were spreading sectarianism through their media, and Western regimes were using their media to spread hatred against the resistance, and they were largely effective. But the world has changed a lot, and we see how people are seeing the truth, and we've reached a point where Tulsi Gabbard admits that the United States, in her Senate confirmation hearing, brought ISIS and Al-Qaeda to power. And that, I think, vindicates the resistance and the axis of resistance. And it shows that from the very beginning, what their intentions were. And I think that, in a big way, strengthens the resistance, despite the loss. But that loss, as I said, began years before the actual fall of the regime. Also, I think those who were mistakenly or otherwise supporting the dirty war in Syria, and who consider themselves to be supporters of Palestine, although on the one hand they're supporting the West's dirty war, and on the other they're opposing another dirty war that's highly problematic, to say the least. But now they have to show whether they're truly honest or not. What is the Jolani regime in Syria going to do about the lands being occupied? Instead of targeting minorities or their own people, what are they going to do to retake the huge amount of territory that the Israeli regime has taken? So in a sense, I think those who were not sincere in their support for the Palestinian people are being exposed. We saw, for example, Qatar, who, in using Al Jazeera, often supports Palestine, but at the same time, Qatar is helping the United States bomb Yemen. How can that be? How can they be sincerely supporting the Palestinian people when they're helping slaughter in Yemen? So, or when Turkey sells oil or transports oil from the Republic of Azerbaijan, cheap oil, to Israel. All of these things, I think, are exposing those who are not honest in their support for the Palestinian people, or who use the Palestinian cause for personal or tribal gains. But I do believe that things have changed dramatically. I think there's a great deal of unity now across the board that goes beyond religion and race and geography. And this is something that we have to expand. We have to preserve it. I've often seen recently, whenever someone strays a bit from the mainstream path of resistance, many of us attack him or her for saying something that we don't totally agree with. We have to focus on Zionism, not on attacking each other. We have to focus on the resistance. We have to focus on the people of Gaza. We have to focus on strengthening the axis of resistance and the broader resistance that exists across the world, and exposing those who cooperate with the Israeli regime, who cooperate with the American regime. And I think, in addition to all that, as I was saying earlier, it's not boycotting Israel. We have to boycott the United States. We have to create a culture where people feel that or young people feel that going to McDonald's, going to Burger King, buying an Apple, buying anything American is just not for them.
Thank you so much, Professor Marandi. Another really powerful set of questions. And I think what you're saying is really focus on the movement, not necessarily even on specific entities or specific events. Thank you very much. Rafael has a question, and I have a couple of very specific questions, and that will be the last round. Thank you for sticking around, and I hope you will stay. Rafael, please go ahead and ask your question.
Hello, everybody. I don't know if you hear me well. I'm Rafael from, I'm Rafael from Montreal, Canada. I'm, of course, French speaking. Please excuse the poor quality of my English. So my little question was, in fact, of course, I don't know anything about the Israel-Palestine question, of course, but I just want to know, in a perfect world, what should we aim for? Me, the only thing that I saw was Oslo 1967. Maybe there's another way to see the things, but for me, this is the way, or maybe answer to this. And what about Jerusalem? So this is my question. What should we aim for? Thank you very much. See you soon.
Okay, so just to clarify, I think Rafael asking what are the concrete demands we should make. I think sort of what you're asking, but anyway, my questions are two. So one is, I would like to know your views in both cases of what exactly do you feel about the question of the so-called of the Israel lobby. The thesis that there is an Israel lobby seems to imply that there is a group of people in the United States that take American foreign policy away from what should be its real goals. But of course, your own analysis shows, and both speakers today have very powerfully shown, that what the United States is doing is part of a larger imperialist agenda, of which the Israel is an inseparable part. So if you could please comment on whether we should be talking about an Israel lobby or not, and if not, if yes or if not, why not? I mean, give your reasons for that. And then secondly, I would like both of you to please comment in both cases, in the case of Gaza as well as in the case of Iran. The two, as I say, the two twin eyes of this current storm as we have it today. What is the military balance of power? I know, of course, that military balance of power is not all that matters. Or you could say that the morale of the people, the determination of the people never to give up is part of the military balance of power. But accounting for those things, if you could please say something about the military balance of power in each of these cases, including, of course, that coming from allies and so on. So those are my questions. I guess, Professor Marandi, I know since you were talking about going earlier, maybe I'll give you the first round of first chance to respond, and then Ramzy at the end. Please go ahead.
Sure. With regards to the aim, I think that the only acceptable aim, morally speaking, is an end to ethno-supremacism, an end to apartheid across Palestine. And that would mean that those who live in Palestine, both within the 1967 borders and beyond, all people are seen as equal before the law and among their peers. And therefore, I do not believe in the two-state solution. I don't believe that, first of all, that the two-state solution is even possible any longer. There was never an intention to have a Palestinian state. And that's why I said in some ways Trump is actually better, because I don't believe that Clinton or Obama or Bush or Reagan or Biden, I don't believe that any of them ever intended, or any of the European leaders, their intention was never for a Palestinian state. The objective was to speak about a two-state solution and let the Israeli regime quietly and slowly take away the West Bank. And that's what we've been seeing for decades. Right now, under the Netanyahu regime, we see this process moving forward much more swiftly, and again, amidst Western silence, Western media silence. But this has been going on for a very, very long time. So the two-state solution is just finished. There are too many colonizers in the West Bank for there to be a two-state solution. And these colonizers are among the most extreme of the Zionists. So the only way out is for a one-state solution where all are human beings, treated as human beings, viewed as human beings, and accepted as equals. Now, I think that we have to always keep focus on the Zionist lobby in the United States because it is the driving force. And it's not simply Jews. Probably in numbers, there are more, well, I think it's quite clear that the number of Christian Zionists are much greater than Jewish Zionists. And there are many people who are secular Zionists. Mainstream American politics are they are a godless bunch, whether they go to church or not. We saw Vance giving the thumbs up when he was told that a residential building was bombed in Sana'a in Yemen. We saw the same with Tulsi Gabbard. Whether you're a Christian or a Jew or a Hindu or a Muslim or of any other persuasion, when you support genocide, you are definitely not a religious person. So whether you say it or not. So I think the focus has to be on AIPAC. Part of our focus at least has to be on AIPAC, to expose AIPAC to the general public. Just like it is the fact that in order to expose the injustices of society, we also have to expose the oligarchs. And many of those oligarchs are Zionists. So whether in a plutocracy like the United States, if we want to dismantle it, I think confronting Zionism has benefits both for the United States itself, but also to dismantle the Zionist regime in Palestine. With regards to the resistance, I would just remind you all of the general narrative of the West. And that is that the West is always saying that its adversaries are being defeated. The Chinese economy is collapsing. We've been hearing that for decades. Every year we hear how the Chinese are in serious trouble. The Russians are losing the war. We've been hearing that for over 3 years. How they have to take the chips out of washing machines to build missiles and how desperate they are and how they're running out of ammunition. We've been hearing that for years. But so far, we see that in the trade war, it is Trump who's been, he didn't blink once, he's already blinked more than once, whether it's backing down on the tariffs in the first wave or the first backing down of Trump, and then, of course, with regards to computers and laptops and so on. So we see weakness in Washington rather than in Beijing. In the war between Russia, the proxy war between Russia and NATO, the same is true. With regards to the resistance, the narrative in the West is the same, that the resistance is being defeated, the resistance is no longer able to stand up. But we've seen that the Israeli regime has failed on all fronts, except for in Syria. In Lebanon, they failed to get to the Litani River. They were the ones who demanded a ceasefire. And Hezbollah, because the country is not controlled by Hezbollah, the government in Lebanon is a government that tilts towards the West, and there are fascists in Lebanon that are pro-Israel. Hezbollah does not control Lebanon, so its resistance against Israel has to take into account what's going on behind their backs. They will be stabbed in the back if they're not careful. So Hezbollah, they resisted, and when the Israeli regime put forward their proposal for a ceasefire, Hezbollah allowed that ceasefire to take place because of what was going on in the rest of the country. But the Israeli regime failed militarily to gain. Yes, they slaughtered thousands of Lebanese, but they failed to take the land. The same is true in Yemen. The Americans, not just the Israeli regime, the Americans have been trying to defeat Ansarullah, and they have failed. They failed to destroy their capability to block the Red Sea. Ansarullah has become a household name like Hezbollah, like Hamas and Islamic Jihad across the region and beyond. And the Americans have failed to do anything about it. They've only made them more heroic in the eyes of the world as a result of Trump's renewal of the aggression against Yemen. And in Syria, I think those who were not sincere about their support for the Palestinian cause have been exposed. And the Israeli regime is paying also a price for Syria now. They have to keep, by taking a large chunk of land, this is very upsetting for all of us that they're occupying some of the most important territories in Syria. But this has overextended the regime. The regime has not been able to remove its troops from the Lebanese border. It has a large number of troops in Syria. It has to keep its occupation force in the West Bank, and it's continuing with its genocidal war in Gaza. This is not good for the Israeli regime. And as I said earlier, the West is much weaker today than it was before, and it continues to decline. The resistance, of course, its heart lies in Iran. There's no doubt about that. The funding for the Axis has come from Iran. That is why Iran is despised. That is why Iran has been antagonized by the West and by regional regimes, using sectarianism, racism, Islamophobia, and all other methods and means that we all know about. But Iran is steadfast, and we've seen at the negotiating table just yesterday, that the United States, despite all the rhetoric and the threats, they had to negotiate indirectly because that was what Iran demanded. They had to negotiate in Oman because that is where Iran said they would negotiate. So the Iranians are being assertive, and the Iranians have said, we will not negotiate about our regional allies. We will not negotiate about our military capabilities. And Iran will continue to support the resistance in Gaza. How they do it, we will never know, perhaps, but it's closing into 2 years. They will continue to support Ansarullah. They will continue to support resistance wherever it is. And I believe that the United States does not have the capability to win a war with Iran. I think that Tucker Carlson's tweet is very important. He is the most well-connected journalist in the United States today because of his relationship with Trump. He knows what's going on in the Pentagon and what is the thinking among the military in the United States. When he says that a war with Iran would lead to the defeat of the United States and thousands of American deaths, he's not saying it just based on his own interpretation. It's definitely based on what people who understand warfare are telling him. So I think that there is a possibility for conflict between Iran and the United States, but the United States will not win. Iran will continue to support the axis of resistance, and that is something that we all will do, and hopefully in the weeks and months ahead, we will all achieve at the different levels greater success, and we will further marginalize the United States. And the defeat of Zionism is a defeat for imperialism across the world. This is the most ugly manifestation of Western imperialism. And once this has been, it has been exposed, and it is being defeated. And I think once it has been defeated, then I think the whole Western Empire will come to an end.
Thank you. What a powerful set of points, Professor Marandi. I think that you're so absolutely right. The Western media is constantly talking up the power of the West, completely forgetting elementary facts such as the United States has really not won a single one of its wars that it has conducted, whether it is Vietnam or Korea or where have you, and it is even less likely. I mean, then it was more powerful than it is today, so it is less likely this will be the case. Thank you very much. And finally, we will go to Ramzy Baroud for his responses to the last set of questions.
Thank you very much. And also thank you to Professor Marandi as well for his always very poignant and articulate message. Just going to Raphael's question very quickly, I actually love the way it was asked. I don't feel like I know much about the subject, but what should we aim for? Very action driven. And I think a lot of us should actually be thinking around that kind of lines or these kind of lines. Sometimes we feel that we know so much, but we are rarely driven by the idea of, well, what are we fighting for anyway? And I would say we are fighting here for, and I'm speaking as, you know, someone who would like to see himself as an intellectual. We are dealing with an issue pertaining to the discourse. I am ineffectual when it comes to fighting. I never touched a gun in my whole life, so I wouldn't be able to advise regarding that particular issue. But what can we do as intellectuals? And what can we do as people who care about Palestine, but also care about the well-being of nations and children, and don't want to see these kind of genocides and massacres continue. And I would say to do so, we have to go back to the very, very beginning, to Zionism. Zionism is a very archaic, particularly violent form of colonialism, because when we think colonialism, we think of colonialism in the traditional sense. You know, the one that followed the scramble for Africa, the one that was initiated even prior to that, kind of late 18th century, 19th century, and it continued for many years after that. Then you had neocolonialism, which is kind of the perpetuation of colonialism by other means. Ultimately, it aims at geostrategic positioning, natural resources, and all of that. But it has been done, of course, with a discourse. The discourse has always been positioned within the elevation of the Western race, of the whites, at the expense of everybody else, and the dehumanization of everybody else. So it is essentially an economic venture with a political framing, and also a large ideological and growing discourse that allows the dominant Western white race, or wants to see itself as such, to subdue everybody else in the name of manifest destiny, in the name of the chosenness. The Zionists are the chosen people, and so forth and so on. The reason I said is that kind of a particularly archaic form of colonialism, because it kind of Zionism sprung up at a time that colonialism itself was redefining itself. So we are talking about the end of the mandate era, the British, French, and other Western colonial mandates over the, various parts of the global South, where they were trying to create this new concept of nation states and help these nations liberate themselves and decolonize and so forth and so on. And then Zionism kind of pushes the reset button and takes us all the way back to the very old form of colonialism, that of Congo, that of, the complete eradication and ethnic cleansing of the natives and that sort of thing. And they are still fighting for that kind of definition. Currently, Zionism is still fighting to keep pushing the reset button on colonialism in its ugliest and most violent manifestation. And this is why it's becoming an embarrassment to the very West. Because it is pushing in a completely opposite or an anti-historical trajectory, if you will. And this is why many within the Western mainstream thinking find Zionism in its current form quite problematic to their own thinking of colonialism and neocolonialism. So what do? We need to expose Zionism. You expose Zionism, you unravel Zionism. You don't need to talk about solutions. I don't engage in the conversation about solutions, because the precondition of any solution, if you must, it has to be the exposing and the eradication of Zionism as a fascist, violent, extremely violent ideology. We cannot, as Palestinians or anybody else in the region, in fact, it really shouldn't be acceptable by anyone in the world to coexist while Zionism still reigns supreme. Call it one state, two state, a million state, it makes no difference. Zionism is gone. Then you will have to find a political formula that would allow for the existence of the various people and ethnicities and religions and nations that exist in that part of the world to find their common ground. So this is what we should be aiming for, defeating Zionism. Very quickly regarding the 2 points that were also raised about the Israel lobby. This is actually a very, very good question, because in my opinion, this is ultimately about framing. It worries me a great deal sometimes when I see people talking about the Zionist lobby as if it is the essence of the problem. And if it were not for the Zionists, the West is really fine. Everything is great. America is a wonderful, country with the most inspiring foreign policy agenda, and everybody is happy. What's the problem? Remove the Zionists, everything is going to be okay. It doesn't work that way. The Israel lobby would have not been allowed to even exist. Why isn't there a Zionist lobby in China right now? I mean, they would love to have a powerful and influential Zionist lobby in Beijing, but they don't, because the political environment there does not give them the space to kind of inject themselves as part of the body the body politic of China. And that applies to so many other environments and political entities and polities as well. The reason that the Zionists are thriving in America is because the United States champions and stands for a racist, racially motivated colonial agenda and neo-colonial agenda that makes this a perfect marriage between the Zionists and the American imperialists. And if you don't believe me, just check what Donald Trump said today. Today he was speaking about the reason why he is not going to participate in the G20 summit that is going to be held in Africa. And his response is, well, I will not do so because there's a great deal of injustice against the whites. I mean, what other language do you need to actually demonstrate that there is a very important ethnic component or racial component in the American colonial agenda? Zionism is thriving there because of this. But the reason, so this is really about the framing. Let's not use the Zionist lobby as a way to kind of absolve American colonialism and imperialism and Western colonialism and imperialism from all of its sins. All of its sins and major wars and Holocaust and genocides and the mutilation of nations and destruction of their economic powers and the exploitation that follows and all of that. The reason we focus so much on the Zionist lobby, number one, because of Palestine, because the Zionist colonial agenda regarding Palestine is dictated by the Zionist lobby. It's not dictated necessarily by the oil lobby. It doesn't mean that the oil lobby is less exploitative. But because the oil lobby, in many ways, they would like to see some degree of stability in the Middle East, and they would like to see the trade routes from Hormuz to Bab el-Mandeb to Suez Canal somewhat safe for their product and for their merchandise. It's as simple as that. It doesn't make them good guys. It just simply means that they aim for something that sometimes may overlap or may not overlap with the interests of the Zionist lobby. The Zionist lobby's agenda in the United States is a Zionist agenda, is a Likudist agenda. They wait for the talking points given to them by Benjamin Netanyahu, and they have so much power and influence in America to the point that in many, many ways, especially during the Biden administration, and I do agree with Professor Marandi about his point regarding Trump. He's not a good guy, but he seems to be driven by a somewhat different agenda within that colonial framework. It's a colonial movement, but within a larger movement that has different priorities. And the Zionist lobby is constantly prioritizing American and Western agenda in favor of Israel. And that's why it's particularly dangerous. Regarding resistance, and that's my last point, it's funny sometimes when you see the BBC or CNN, when they kind of talk about Russia versus Ukraine or China versus Taiwan, and they kind of show you an infographic of the tanks and airplanes and, of each side and kind of tell you what are the chances of this side winning against this side. If you are to draw that infographic of Israel versus Gaza, what are you going to have? Seriously, what are you going to have? Thousands of Israeli Merkavas and thousands of Israeli military vehicles and airplanes and the most sophisticated killing technologies, including AI. Thousands of Palestinians have been killed because of the Israeli use or misuse of artificial intelligence versus what? Leftover Israeli shells that have not exploded being remanufactured by Palestinians underground and used to recreate some improvised devices that they give it various names, the Shawal, the Yassin 105, and that sort of thing. So there is no parallel here in terms of military power. There is absolutely no parallel. But here is the difference. In guerrilla warfare, if you don't lose, you win. And in order for you not to lose, it's essentially about what we describe as radical hope, radical resistance. It's just the idea that under no circumstance we are going to give up. Because giving up, the outcome of giving up is far worse than the outcome of not giving up. So we fight. We fight and we use this, what used to be a cliche and sadly is now a reality. We fight until the last drop of blood. It seems that we are fighting until the last drop of blood. The fact that Israel could not win against those Palestinians in Gaza over the course of 18 months, after using something at this point over 100,000 tons of American weapons, it means that they can't win. I was born and raised in Gaza. I lived in a refugee camp, and I know what Israeli occupation is like. The fact is, the Israeli occupiers were not inside my refugee camp every single day. They had their own military positions in central Gaza. That's where I live. Others in Khan Yunis, and some in the Netzarim area, where there was a settlement called Netzarim. And they would come and launch their raids quite often at dawn, at the middle of the night. They would kill, they would arrest, they would take people, and they would disappear, and they would leave. What is the difference between what is happening in Gaza now compared to what happened in Gaza then? The Israelis have military bases inside of Gaza, near Netzarim, in central Gaza, in Khan Yunis, in Rafah, Philadelphia Corridor, and all the rest. Beit Lahia, Beit Hanun. How is that any different from the military occupation that existed between 1967 and until the Israeli so-called withdrawal or redeployment in 2005? It is essentially the same. But here is the thing. Ariel Sharon, the Israeli prime minister, the right-wing, very militant, very violent prime minister responsible for the Sabra and Shatila massacre, was forced out of Gaza in 2005 under the pressure of the military, because they said we can't handle the resistance. What kind of resistance existed in Gaza when Israel left in 2005? What kind of weapons did they have? They had something called Qassam-1, the initial rocket that had a velocity of one kilometer. The Israelis could not handle that, and they ran out of Gaza in the middle of the night. And I remember the night that they got out of Gaza and people chased them to the border. Are they going to be able to fight against this generation of fighters, against this tenacity of these people? I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that Israel will not win this war against Gaza. Not a single doubt. And this is perfectly rational, justified by historical precedents. Israel could not handle Gaza when Gaza had nothing. And Israel will not be able to handle Gaza when Gaza has everything. That's it.
Wow, thank you so much, Ramzy, and also your answer works so well with the one Professor Marandi gave. I mean, the fact is that it is precisely because they cannot win that they are getting so desperate, so irrational, so violent, because they need to maintain their position, but their means to do so is today less strong than ever. I think this has been such an amazing, thought-provoking, informative session. We've had a very good audience here. We've had over 100 people watching on YouTube. I hope everyone who is here, who appreciated and understood what we have had here today, will share the recording, which we will post. There will be the YouTube anyway, but because we are live on YouTube, but we will also be posting recordings. So please share as widely as you can. The message that our two speakers have had to give is very powerful. And I think we also know why it is powerful, because, you know, in a certain sense, both speakers represent a generation of people who have fought themselves and suffered under. Professor Marandi had fought in the horrific Iran-Iraq war. Ramzy Baroud has seen himself the destruction that Israel has inflicted and has lived through it, has experienced it. And so this is the generation which was supposed to be destroyed, that is coming up and fighting and speaking with a voice and with an authority that is extremely powerful. So I hope, as I say, you all appreciated all this, and we look forward to seeing many of you in future webinars, although I doubt they will match this one quite in terms of its importance. I also agree, I think, with both of you that the defeat of imperialism, Zionism, etc., in this region is possibly the end of imperialism. I think this is where it has been the most powerful. It has been able to destabilize this region. It has been able to wreak havoc, but now the region is increasingly getting unified and fighting back. With that thought, I think I will bring this wonderful session to an end. Thank you very much. We all really appreciate the fact that you are so busy. You are giving your precious time to us, and I hope that this message gets out to as many people as possible. Thank you again, and hope to hear from you another time soon. Bye-bye.